went very well. I had a bone chip up under my kneecap that I'd been hobbling around on for 3 weeks. That was painful. And so, frankly, I think I'm doing pretty well, and only have to use a cane if I'm going up or down stairs, that kind of thing. Otherwise, I'm fairly mobile. But have to kind of take it easy and not overdo it. And so what I may do is do it the old-fashioned rabbinical way. I don't know if you know this, but did you know that in the days of Jesus that the rabbi or the teacher would be seated and the congregation would stand during the time of the lesson? Did you know that? I mean, you know, that's the way it was in the first century. And that's why, you know, even if you read the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, it says, and Jesus was seated and he began to teach. And maybe you didn't catch that, but that was traditional rabbinical style. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to go ahead and be seated, and I will be the rabbi. I will not, however, make you stand during the entire remarks. Fair enough? Okay, good deal. I want to be able to see you all because, you know, that way I will know whether you have gone to sleep or not. But I appreciate your indulging me in this. I think I will do better if I'm not worried about falling down on my face, which I'm not really worried about physically. But if you've ever run for office, you have to worry about doing that rhetorically. By the way, delighted to be in Denison, and I do know that Janet was here. I can't remember exactly when she was here, but in this very restaurant, as I recall, probably this very room. I'm guessing so. So I will call and tell her that the joint looks pretty good still. It's doing good. I also know that this is the hometown of Donna Reed. I think that's pretty cool. One of the great things about traveling around Iowa is finding out all the little nuances of communities. Having been to Winterset, John Wayne's hometown, and home of the Bridges of Madison County, that was neat. Going up and see the Field of Dreams and swinging at a few baseballs there. Watching Shoeless Joe come through the cornfield and come and visit with us. Maybe he didn't do that for you, but he did for us. I just want you to know. You know, we went to the home of Glenn Miller, which, you know, a lot of people probably say, who's Glenn Miller, which is sad. One of the great musicians of all time, and Iowa's his home state. And we went to his home place in Clarinda. And I'm trying to think of some of the other places, but, you know, I've decided that when the campaign is over and I've served my 8 years as president, I'm going to write a book on touring Iowa. And I'm going to write it for all the people in Iowa who's never seen as much of this state as I have. Because I've been to all 99 counties more than once, and I'm just, have any of you done that? I'm the only guy in the room that's been to all 99 counties twice. And I don't even live here. Well, let me tell you some things about your state. It's really a lovely state and great people. And it really is. And I thank you so much for coming out. I know it's cold. I know there's snow on the ground. But you know what? 2 months from last night, it's going to be caucus night in Iowa. And on caucus night, February the 1st, there's going to be snow on the ground. And it's going to be cold. Probably colder than it is today. It's possible sleet will be falling. It's possible that it will be treacherous outside. But I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you today, even though it's 2 months away, no matter what the weather is like and how much snow is on the ground and how much the sleet is falling, I am going to ask you to get out in that treacherous weather, go to the caucus site, caucus for me, get your friends, relatives, people you work with, and your neighbors to do the same. Let's make sure that we win this county, and that once again, like I did in 2008, I win the Iowa caucuses, and then from there it's on to the White House. Now, let me also add, I cannot imagine that you would consider caucusing for somebody else. Look, I know there's 327 Republicans in the race this year and on the ballot for president. If for some reason you end up having this irrational, illogical, and strange thought that you want to support someone else in the caucuses, I just want to remind you that 2 months from now, there's going to be snow on the ground. It's going to be very cold outside. Sleet will be falling. And it's going to be treacherous out there. I suggest you stay home and watch it all on TV. Are we clear on that? Good. I want to visit with you for just a few moments. Then I'm going to ask you to throw at me any questions that you want, and I will be happy to answer them. or avoid them and make you think that I'm answering them, whichever is easiest for me. I always said that in politics we have this part of the program called Q&A, and everybody thinks it stands for questions and answers. If you're running for office, it stands for questions and avoidance. You take any question people want to give, you just try to make sure that you don't have a career-ending answer with what you say. So that'll be my goal here today. This week has been an interesting week. The President has been in France talking about climate change. The President thinks climate change is the biggest danger we face in the world today. Amazing thing, isn't it? We've got hundreds of thousands of people being beheaded around the world by radical Islamists, and he believes that climate change, that wouldn't even happen except over hundreds, if not thousands of years, poses a more significant and immediate threat to you than radical jihadism. Let me just say for the record that I believe that a beheading is much worse than a sunburn. And the notion that the President is spending his time in Paris, ironically Paris, where they've just had one of the most brutal, savage terrorist attacks in quite some time, and he's with a straight face trying to tell the people of Paris that they really need to be more afraid of an incremental change of the temperature than they should be about people who will gun them down while they're sitting having coffee or going to a rock concert or a soccer game. I find it absurd. And I find it even more absurd that he stands up at a press conference and apologizes for the success of America, saying that he wants to say how sorry he is that America has been successful and prosperous, particularly in the area of energy, and that he would like to acknowledge that America is all to blame for the fact that we have incremental climate change, which, by the way, when I was in college 40 years ago, we were told that there was climate change, but we were told that what we needed to be afraid of was the coming ice age. That it wasn't global warming, it was global freezing. And that if we didn't act right then, I remember very vividly, 1973, 1974, that if we did not do something drastic and do it right now, that we would all be human popsicles by 1980. And the world would be coming to a crashing end before our lifetime was over. I'm not trying to belittle any effect that the globe may have, but I would just want to point out that if the President is so concerned about CO2 emissions, why did he fly Air Force One to Paris and back, putting out more CO2 on that one trip than a car will put out in 72 years? One of the pundits that I read from time to time made this comment. I think it's very true. I will believe that climate change is a serious threat when the people who believe in climate change treat it like it's a serious threat and act like it. When they stop flying private jets from all over the world to attend conferences and blow through more CO2, and that doesn't even include the hot air of their speeches. If they really were concerned about the impact of a carbon footprint, then have their little conference on Skype. Wouldn't be any carbon footprint. It could be done for free over the internet. I don't know why they didn't think of that. I did. That's why I should be president. That and about 1,000 other reasons, and we'll get to a few of them today. I'm not ashamed of America. I wish the president wasn't. I'm ashamed that a president would go to France and make like that we should be sorry for our prosperity. It is the prosperity of this country that has often been the reason that some countries had their rear ends bailed out, because it was America that stepped in and did it for them. Whether it was to end their war, whether it was to rescue them as a result of an earthquake or a tsunami, whether it was to send them food and aid and shelter when there was starvation and famine. It has been the prosperity of America and our generosity that the world has looked to. And rather than going across the globe apologizing for this country, we should go around the world and remind the rest of this planet of ours exactly what American creativity and American hard work and American generosity has done for the world, rather than trying to pretend that we've done something to the world. I'm tired of America being blamed. I want America to start getting credit. And I want America to get back to that place where we unapologetically live to enjoy the prosperity because we recognize the resources that God has put under our feet. And rather than saying we're not going to engage in the use of our energy resources, I think we ought to be saying, oh, we're going to engage in them all right, and we're going to become the #1 exporter of energy to the rest of the world. We're going to take on the markets that are currently held by Russia, the Iranians, and the Saudis. We're not only going to upend the economic balance in the world by being the #1 energy explorer and exporter, but we're going to upend the balance of world power, because if you take away the economic power and engine that energy provides for the Russians, the Iranians, and the Saudis, you change their ability to make war and to create mischief in the world.
Hear, hear.
This is how America can once again change the balance of world power. I'm committed to the idea that we'll go after every bit of coal, oil, gas, wind, biofuels, ethanol, wind and solar that we can possibly come up with in this country and export our energy. We will become the #1 supplier to Europe, Africa, and Asia. We will put these rogue countries out of the energy business. It means lower prices for Americans. It means millions of jobs for Americans. And I promise you this, we won't be apologizing for using the resources that we have under our feet, several hundred years worth of those resources. And it makes no sense that we would not be having the prosperity that we should be having and the strength that should come from that. This is why this election is far more than just picking a personality to be president. Now, I know some people are so angry at government, and believe me, I'm there. Frankly, I'm pretty upset that the Republicans that we sent to Washington haven't done anything either. I went to 37 states last year campaigning for people to be senator, congressman, governor, with the hopes that if we got more in the majority, that they would at least put some type of backstop to the overreach executive powers that President Obama has illegally used to do things like open up illegal immigration without constitutional and congressional authority, to just use his pen and a phone to carry out things that he does not have the authority to do. I thought that the Congress would at least exercise their constitutional responsibility and, frankly, their duty to provide the check and balance that they're supposed to provide to an executive branch that overreaches. But they haven't. So when someone comes to Iowa and says, hey, I'm in the Senate, I want to be president, if they haven't been effective where they are, why would you give them a job that is bigger than what they're already doing? And are you willing to trust the presidency, the Oval Office, to somebody who is never, ever set in the seat of executive power in government? Now, I've been in private business, and I've been in the nonprofit sector and been a CEO of a nonprofit organization. And I governed a state for 10 and a half years. I want to tell you, it's a lot different governing a state than it is to be the CEO of a private or a nonprofit business. Because quite frankly, when I'm dealing with the businesses that I own, I hire somebody. If they don't work out, I can fire them. I can make big decisions and change things immediately because it's my business and I can do what I want. When you're the president or the governor, you can't fire the legislature. You can't fire everyone in the bureaucracy. You've got to learn how to lead. And let me be clear, making a speech isn't leadership. I can make a speech, but that doesn't necessarily accomplish a lot other than might make some people stand up and cheer, but I'm not the least bit of the mind to believe that just having the ability to make a speech is the same thing as actually leading, because leading leads to a result. It leads into something different. Now, if you think the presidency is an entry-level job, that anybody could do it, that we could just go through the phone book, randomly pick out a name and say, congratulations, Mr. President. We're going to fly you to Washington, give you that great big house, the plane, and all the stuff that goes with it. And for the next 4 to 8 years, you get to be President of the United States. None of us think that's a good idea, because we do believe that the job requires some skill, some experience, some maturity, some seasoned judgment. Because after all, you don't elect a president for what he will do with what he knows. You elect him for how he will react when what happens is something he didn't know was going to happen and nobody saw coming. I know as governor, my 10.5 years in that position, every day I had a schedule, I had an agenda, I had priorities. But the days that I really earned my paycheck were the days that the unexpected happened. And that's when I was required to step in and lead and make the tough decisions, some of which were life and death. When an ice storm hit our state and knocked the power out for 2/3, 66% of our state's population for up to 2 weeks, putting us virtually in an ice age, it takes some real creative leadership to shepherd your state through a crisis like that. When we had to absorb 75,000 people coming to us from Hurricane Katrina who didn't have even so much as a change of clothes, much less IDs, prescription medications, nothing. And we had to absorb 75,000 in less than 5 days into our state, finding a place for them to sleep, shower, eat, clothes to wear, reconstruct their identity, get their medications, get their kids enrolled in school. Handling that was a challenge of leadership. And I think sometimes we forget that the presidency is not only about hiring someone to do the job that you think he's going to do, but it's having someone prepared to be able to face and lead through the unexpected. 3 weeks ago, I was on a flight from South Carolina to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it was a Friday night. We were in Atlanta, changing planes, making the connecting flight from South Carolina to Cedar Rapids. If you've flown much east of the Mississippi, you know that if you go anywhere, you're going to have to change planes in Atlanta. I've decided that when I die and go to heaven, I'll stop in Atlanta on the way and get a connection. So we go from South Carolina to Atlanta. We get to Atlanta, we're waiting on the flight to Cedar Rapids, and we look up there and the flight's delayed. Gate agent comes on the PA system and announces that the flight's going to be delayed a little more. The plane hasn't arrived. A little while later, the plane shows up. Gate agent comes and says, folks, the plane has arrived, but we have to have a fresh crew, and they're not here yet, so when they get here, we'll start loading you up and get you to Cedar Rapids. We apologize for the delay. Now, this is the last flight of the night. It's going to be late Friday night. Flight's now delayed an hour, hour and a half, getting close to 2 hours. A little after 2 hours of a delay, gate agent comes back on and says, ladies and gentlemen, we're still waiting on that crew to come. We hear they're going to be here any minute, but I know you're ready to get to Cedar Rapids, so I just want to find out, is anybody here in the gate area that would like to volunteer to fly the plane to Cedar Rapids? So we all did, even as tired as we were, we did exactly what you just did. We laughed out loud. And you know why? Because it was ludicrous to think that any of us would be willing to get on an airplane and fly with someone in the cockpit who was just some volunteer who said, no, I've never flown a plane, but hey, I stayed in the Holiday Inn Express last night, so why not? I mean, none of us would do that. None of you would get on that airplane, and I guarantee you none of you would put your children or your grandchildren on that airplane with someone who had never been in the cockpit. I ask you this question. Are you really prepared to send someone into the Oval Office who has never, ever sat at the place of an executive seat in government and has any idea what that involves? Do you believe the job is so easy that a person can show up and on day one just figure it all out and be a great president from the moment he gets there? Because if you do, next time we on a flight somewhere and just needs a volunteer pilot, I'm going to say, hey, I know some folks in Denison, Iowa. They're willing to get on that plane. But you know you're not. And neither am I. And I promise you this, I would never put my grandkids on that airplane. Folks, I'm running for president because I got 5 grandkids, and I'm worried about their country. Look, I'm close enough to the finish line, like many of you. I'll probably be okay. They're not going to be okay unless we bring some real different policies to this country and its government, until we get our economy under control, until we get our borders, our military built back up, until we get to the place where we once again have a president who believes in the moral clarity of this country and believes that some things are just simply right and some things are wrong, and that we govern with unapologetic commitment to a sense of moral clarity. I don't want to walk my 5 grandkids through the charred remains of a great country called America and say, here you go. $20 trillion in debt. A country that has decided that it's not going to have borders anymore. A country that has now seen 40 straight years where the bottom 90% of the people in the economy have had stagnant wages. Stagnant wages. I don't have to tell you this. Many of you you've experienced it. You work as hard as you've ever worked in your life. Some of you working harder than you've ever worked, with less to show for it. It used to be that if you worked as hard as you're working, you'd be moving up the ladder. You might not be as rich as Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, but you'd be better off than you had been 5 years before, and that's no longer the case. Your health insurance alone is taking what little raise you might have seen over the last 3 years, and it's wiped it out. Most Americans have saved less than $1,000. Think about this. Less than $1,000 the average American has in savings. Some of you are saying, boy, that's a lot more money than I got saved. I understand. Most of America lives one root canal away from financial trouble. Simple trip to the dentist and you're wiped out with your savings. And if your car needs repair the same week you've got to go to the dentist, you're really in trouble. That's how close it is for most Americans. And do you really think the people who are in Washington now understand that? Or do you think they care? I'm convinced they don't. Neither do they understand, nor do they really care. They care about their pensions. They care about their health care. One solution I have to the VA health care crisis is simple. Let every senator, every congressman, and the president get their health care from the same VA that we ask our veterans to get. And I guarantee you this, when senators are sitting in the same waiting room as veterans, they'll get the system fixed and they'll do it pronto. That would be one way to get that system fixed. And no veteran should ever have to be told you're going to have to wait. Because that veteran kept his promise to America, and this country better keep its promise to the veterans. And speaking of promises, this country made some promises that it was going to take money out of your paycheck for every year you ever worked, set it aside for a little thing called Social Security and Medicare. And now we've got people, even Republicans. Heck, I share the stage with some Republicans who think that we need to raise the age at which you get those benefits. We need to means test, and if somebody in Washington thinks you've earned too much money, then they're just going to say, well, you're not going to get your Social Security check, and we're going to reduce the benefits. Now, I've got a message for Washington. Keep your stinking hands off of the money that American working people have put into Social Security and Medicare. Washington, that is not your money. It is the money from American workers. They put it there. Nobody asked them if they wanted to give it away. It was involuntarily lifted from their paychecks. And by gosh, Washington ought to leave it alone and make sure that they keep the promises to the people who put that money in the Social Security account. And there should not be this idea of let's cut the benefits down for the people, because it isn't Washington's money, even though they've stolen it. And I'm going to tell you, Bernie Madoff is in prison right now for doing less than the government has done. And if you say, oh no, it's the same. No, Bernie did less, because here's the difference. People gave their money to Bernie Madoff voluntarily. They didn't have to. They chose to give their money to him. They trusted him. Yes, he was a con man and a thief, and he was a liar, and he swindled them, and he took advantage of them. But he's sitting in prison today as a result of it. But at least the money that he took from them, they voluntarily gave. The money the government took from you, you had no choice in. When I started work at age 14 and I started getting my first paycheck, nobody ever came and said, now, you're 14, you might need to keep that money. Would you like to keep yours? I'd have said, heck yeah, let me keep it. Because I was having to pay for everything, my own education and clothing and everything else. That's how I paid my way through junior high, high school, college, and grad school. Was working. And I could have used that money back then. But nobody gave me the option. The government took it from me before I ever saw it. That's why I say, if Bernie Madoff is in prison, where are the people from Washington? And why aren't some of them in prison for having stolen it out of the Social Security Trust Fund? Folks, we've got to fix that. And I pledge to you that we will. Well, I want to pause and let you ask me questions. There's a lot of things I'd love to talk about, everything from the fair tax and why I support it, to how do we defeat ISIS, to border security, and I've got some ideas on how we fix that. I'll quickly give you one. As President, I will move the Director of Homeland Security and his family to Laredo, Texas, and tell him he's not moving until we secure the border. It will be done in less than a year. I promise you that. All right, let's see. Who's got a question? And we'll go from there. Yes, sir, right over here.
Yeah, I don't believe that ISIS is our biggest problem. I don't think climate control is our biggest problem. I think our biggest problem has been, anyway, for the last 7 years, is the man that's occupying the White House. But I know the GOP can't say that, because if they did directly, of course, you'd be a racist. But, you know, our country faces so many problems, you don't hardly know where to begin. But do you have a detailed plan on immigration, how to fix this ongoing, never-ending immigration question?
Yes, sir, I do. And let me address that. But let me address the situation. You know, President Obama came in with more opportunity than any president in my lifetime to be a great president. I didn't vote for him. I campaigned for McCain after I lost the nomination to John McCain. I came in second to McCain. Being second in a primary doesn't mean diddly squat. I can tell you, there's no red ribbon. It's all or nothing. It's the way the process works. But I did my duty. I'm a good, loyal soldier, and I campaigned for John McCain. I was in Springfield and Joplin, Missouri the night before the primary. I lost my voice going out there campaigning, speaking and projecting my voice over the past several weeks prior to the election. So I'm telling you that. But even when Obama won the election, I'm not ashamed to tell you that there was a part of me deep inside that had high hopes, and here's why. Look, I grew up in South Arkansas in the 50s and 60s. I saw what real racism looks like. I saw what segregation does to people and does to communities. I hated it when I was a kid. Something inside told me it wasn't right. I was a part of, in my junior high, of helping to create an atmosphere when the schools were fully integrated. There was a black student in me that we took it upon ourselves to lead our class through that process, to make it so that we didn't have the fights and we didn't have the trouble. And I'm proud to have been a part of that. And to have been a part of a senior class that elected the first ever African-American homecoming queen in the history of our high school. That was a milestone. I could tell you about the time when I was in my 20s, just starting a pastorate in a church when I was just a young guy. And I stood in front of an all-white congregation that had been perfectly all-white for 100 years and welcomed the first African-American member. And so people were very angry about it. And I was very clear that if this young man is not welcome into our church and you turn him away, then I walk out with him. Because I will not pastor a church that is not open to anybody, I don't care what color they are. And I was adamant about that. I had death threats. I had 7 or 8 people in the church that threatened that they would see to it that the money just dried up and there was not enough to pay the bills the next month, and I'd wished I'd never done that. 7 or 8 people angrily left the church. The best thing that ever happened to that church were those people who left. I know sometimes we talk about the additions that we pray for. I prayed for some subtractions, and I got some. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened, because these folks left, and it brought new joy and energy. The next month we had the record level of offerings in the history of our church and record level of attendance, and never went down again. So I know what it is to see it, face it, hate it, want to see it change. But if you'd have told me as a little kid growing up in South Arkansas that I would live to see the day that we elected an African-American president, I'd have said, not in my lifetime. And so there was a side of me when he was elected, I said, you know, I want him to do well. I heard conservatives, some of them say, I hope he fails. Well, I thought, I want my country to succeed. And if this president will do what he said in his campaign, bring this country together, govern bipartisan manner, look to the bigger and bolder things that we can do as a country, you know, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And my disappointment is because I think he could have been a great president if he had wanted to be. But he wanted to bring a level of division to this country that I simply can't explain. And I think some of it is the lack of his understanding the role of the executive branch. Some of it is his arrogance, his thought that he knows more than anybody around him. Folks, I tell you something, if somebody has all the answers, you better run from them. Because the most dangerous person in the room is the person who doesn't know what he doesn't know. That's the person who will get you killed. So I want to preface everything I'm about to say because I think your question is a valid one. But this president has failed us because instead of helping to unify and bring the country together, he's split us apart and racially divided us more than anybody in my lifetime. And that's unfortunate. But we don't have to stay this way. We can be led beyond this and be this great country again. Immigration has been one of those dividing places. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons is because Republicans haven't wanted to fix it either. Now let me explain to you why. One reason I am a strong supporter of the fair tax, which if you're not familiar with, we would eliminate all the taxes on our work and payroll, income, savings, dividends, capital gains, inheritance. Tax rate would be zero on anything we produce. And instead we pay tax at the point of consumption. In other words, we'd have a national sales tax instead of a national income tax. That eliminates the IRS. Other candidates will tell you they'll eliminate the IRS, but they will not unless they eliminate all taxes on income. The fair tax has a unique power to help us resolve the immigration question, which first, I believe, you do secure the border. I'm not kidding. I'd put the Director of Homeland Security in Laredo. We would get it done in less than a year, not just because of that, but because we can do it. 73 years ago, we built a 1,700-mile road from British Columbia to Alaska. We did it during an Arctic winter, and folks, we did it in less than a year. 73 years ago. I was at the border at San Diego where 20 years ago they put a double fence at San Diego for a 20-mile stretch, and since that fence has gone up, not a single fence, a double fence, it reduced illegal apprehensions by 95% and crime went down in San Diego by 54%. It works. I've been to Israel so many times I've lost count. I've been going there 42 years. When Israel put up their security fence that the world condemned them for, the rate of suicide bombers in Israel went from 1,000 a year, where people would put bombs in trash cans and on school buses and in cafes, 1,000 a year to 0 a year, because they simply decided they were going to control their borders and protect their citizens. We will build the fence within a year. But the second thing is, what do you do about dealing with the people who are here? Look, the simplest way, take away the economic incentive. Here's the incentive. Under the current way it works, if I'm an employer, and let's say I hire you and you're an illegal immigrant, and the reason you're the illegal immigrant and I'm the employer is because I'm telling the story. That's how this works. But if I hire you for $8 an hour for a job that if I paid you, an American citizen, I got to pay you 12, but I underpay you, only pay you 8, first of all, I'm underpaying $4, I'm coming out ahead. But you know what? You're going to net more money at $8 an hour illegally than you will at 12, because out of your paycheck comes income tax, payroll tax, Social Security, and Medicare tax. Out of your check comes nothing. It's all cash. You report nothing, you pay nothing, it's pure $8, you have 12, and we're going to tax a chunk of it, maybe up to half. So here's the difference. If I'm an employer and I'm paying you 8, I've exploited your labor. That's the first thing I've done. But the second thing I've done, by hiring you instead of you, I'm not paying the employer's portion of the payroll tax. So I'm getting a double financial economic incentive by underpaying you and then cheating on the government and making all of the rest of you pay my portion and his portion of the payroll tax. And the Social Security fund and the Medicare fund is underfunded in part because not enough people are paying in. If we had the fair tax, here's what would happen. We wouldn't take anything out of your check or yours. But when you went to pay and buy clothes or a car, whatever it is you bought, you'd pay the same tax, I don't care who you are. And if we take the economic advantage out of employing illegal people, we'll be employing fewer illegal people. and take it away not only from the illegal immigrant, but take it away from the employer. Take that advantage away from him. And it goes a long way to resolving the problem. And it's why, for me, the fair tax is like an elixir that covers many of our ailments in this country, economic, social, and otherwise. But it would transform the way we do business in this country. I'm sorry I gave such a long answer to a simple question, but that kind of lent itself for that. I appreciate it very much. Okay, somebody else. Yes, sir.
This is not really specific to you, but on all the talk shows, it seems like some candidates get more FaceTime than others.
They do.
Why is that? Do you ask to be on, or do they solicit you? But it seems like the amount of FaceTime on TV isn't proportionate to their poll standing.
Let me tell you this. It's not only disproportionate to poll standing, it's also disproportionate to credibility, experience, and qualification to be president. I've said for many months that if you put as much helium in my balloon, I've said this to network officials, if you put as much helium in my balloon as you did some other candidates, I'd be floating as high as they were. I want to tell you something. The reason that the Iowa caucus is so important is you singularly in Iowa have the power to help push back what has become a circus of electing a president. And frankly, let me say this is true for Democrats and Republicans both. The media has manipulated this process by deciding who gets to be on the debate stage, where they stand, how much time they get, not just in the debates, but how much time they get to be on shows. Do they get one segment, two segments? I'll give you a specific example. Between August the 24th and September the 4th, on CNN in prime time, Donald Trump got 568 minutes of prime time coverage on CNN. 568 minutes. You know how much time I got on CNN prime time in that same 2-week period of time? 6 seconds. 6 seconds. That was by actual count. It was a media organization, and they did a thorough analysis of all the candidates and how many times they were mentioned. Folks, you could slur my name and it takes 6 seconds. I mean, basically, I was invisible during that same 2-week period when every speech he made was carried from beginning to end live. Look, I don't blame Donald Trump. Man, my gosh, if I were able to manipulate the media as brilliantly as he has done, and he's a master at it, I congratulate him. I don't in any way criticize him for this. I applaud him. I stand up and cheer him for his ability to completely own the media, and he does. I'm amazed they allow themselves to be manipulated like this, but then I tell you why. Because he makes good copy, as they say in the newspaper business. In the TV business, they say it ticks a rating. That means eyeballs go to the screen. They never know what he's going to say. And the result is revenues go up, because the more eyeballs that are watching, the more they can charge for the spot. Folks, it's all about making money for them, not helping you to make a good decision about being thoughtful in who you select as president. Here's how you change it. If a guy like me ends up winning the Iowa caucuses again this time, and I'm not the guy that had the most money, that got the most TV time, not the guy that the little fellow sitting around the table on network TV every evening, well, let me tell you who I think's up, who's down. If we take that away from them, and you actually make the decision, you change the course of this election. You really do. And that's why what happens 2 months from now is singularly the most important moment in this entire election process. And you can change the trajectory simply by going and not doing what they predict you're going to do. Yes, sir.
A lot of it's rumored and so forth, but last time there was a national election, take the state of Ohio, there's so many stories going around about precincts that had absolutely no Republican votes. I know for a fact that they had the Black Panthers out in front of some polls. There were stories about Republicans being ejected from being poll takers and so forth. And what can you do to assure an honest election? I'm afraid that that's not a possibility anymore.
Well, having run in Arkansas, which was the most lopsided state in the country, completely controlled by the Clinton political machine, look, I saw voter fraud up close and personal. I tell people, look, the reason I'm a Christian is because I truly believe in the resurrection. I saw dead people vote every election year. I mean, it was very evident to me that people came out of the grave and they could vote. I mean, we had several instances. One state representative went to prison because he was caught selling votes for $5. Another one had 120 absentee ballots up on his kitchen table and was voting them. He was a city council member in an East Arkansas community. We had counties where more people voted than were registered. Well, you're talking about voter turnout. That's pretty good when you have 110% of the registered voters turn out. So I know it happens. Look, I look at it this way. I understood going into the system in Arkansas that I had to account for there was going to be some voter fraud. So I never, rather than just say, well, it's not fair. No, it wasn't fair. I just went out and made sure I had enough votes to cover for the ones who would probably be defrauded. And that's honestly how I look at it. Now, I also went after corruption when I got to be governor. And I saw 17 different public officials that we went after that were indicted, tried, and sentenced. And, it got so bad, we used to say the 5 most feared words of an Arkansas politician were these: will the defendant please rise? But folks, the kind of corruption that I found in Arkansas is exactly what we've got in Washington. And it's bipartisan corruption. Let me be very clear. It's not just Democrats who have gotten corrupt. Anybody that gets into government and stays too long will find a way to start saying, I deserve a little piece of this. And it's horrid. If somebody goes to the White House and isn't willing to fight that level of corruption and burn down the cobwebs to build a government that's clean, he's not going to be able to be a very effective president. I think it's one of the great selling points that I have for my candidacy. I've done this before. I know what it's like to sleep with one eye open every night, to go after state senators and representatives and elected officials in high places, and to recognize that they're not going to get away with ripping off and stealing from the taxpayers. And that's what's been happening a long time. So yes, it exists. And the best way we overcome it is, number one, we get elected, and then we fight the corruption and we burn it down like we would burn out a nest of rats. If we don't do that, then it's our fault that we kept it going. Yes, sir.
I'm Pastor Mark, and I came here 6 years ago. I imported from California. Denison used to be a pretty much 90% white community, and then it had transformed, and now we're about 50% white, 50% multi-ethnic. We've recreated the church to be a multi-ethnic community. We have actually more refugees than white people. We see in the political system, Hillary Clinton, morality out the window, all sorts of things that are attached to her, supposedly. We see a moral decline in our whole country, where we see 47% of people still standing behind her, even with all these scandals and everything else. Moral values, illegal activity, that doesn't matter to me. I want to support her. Is we look as a country, we have to transform and help. What's your idea? What's your vision? How do you see helping people come back to our godly roots? Our internationals that I'm working with, they don't understand. They're coming from a Christian background. They're coming from very conservative backgrounds, our Asians and our African refugees. And they don't understand this whole concept of what's going on. I have trouble explaining it in a very simple way.
I can understand that, because I have trouble explaining why people would vote for those who would not be held accountable for corruption. I go to a church that is multi-ethnic. Our church is very diverse. Frankly, I don't know that I'd want to go to a church that wasn't, because it gives us a great sense of real community, and we don't think anything about it. The fact that we have every kind of person imaginable that attends our church. Very Bible-focused, very evangelical. We probably baptize 400-500 people a year. So we're very clear in outreach, but we do a lot of things in terms of ministry to people. I don't care what color a person is or what their ethnic background is. I care about what do they want to do with their lives. You see, I think the greatest quality that we look for is what is it you believe is important in life? I got 48% of the African American vote in my state. One reason I think that Republicans lose elections is because we assume that minorities aren't going to vote for us. That's crazy. Look, I proved that that's not the case at all. 43% of the Hispanic vote, I got that in my state. There's not a Republican in America that ever had 48% of the African American vote. White or black candidate. And people say, well, how'd you do that? Because I never presumed that I couldn't. And let me tell you something. In the African American community, as well as in the Hispanic community, they are actually more conservative about issues like marriage and the sanctity of life than most of the Caucasian people are. I mean, by actual numbers, they are far more conservative. And this notion that, well, they're never going to vote for a Republican, well, not if we don't build relationships and ask for their vote and help them to understand that they really are far more like us than they are the Democrats. And I'm convinced that what we need to do is to not make any assumptions about party labels and about how people are going to vote because of their ethnicity. I'll tell you another thing. I got a lot of union votes. You know, 35% of all union members in America are Republican. That may surprise you, but guess what? A lot of union members are union members because if they want to go to work as a finished carpenter or as an electrician, they got to belong to the union. But you know what else they are? They're church-going, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, gun-owning, hard-working, red-blooded Americans who love this country. And rather than Republicans just writing them off and saying, well, all union members are terrible, we're not going to even ask for their vote, folks, I'm going to go ask for their vote. Because I've got a lot more in common with them on the Second Amendment and on the sanctity of life and on the issue of marriage and on the issue of who this country belongs to and on than I do simply that they have a union card and are a member of a union so that they can go to work as an electrician. We can win elections that we've been losing, but we can't do it as long as we sort of have this mythical notion that there are certain people that are never going to vote for us, and so we're not even going to try to build the relationships. In my own political career, I proved that's not true. The base vote for a Republican in Arkansas was 37%. You didn't get, if you were a Republican, you got 37% of the vote and you got defeated. If you got more than 39, you did something really extraordinary, and you never won, but you said, well, I beat the ceiling. I got 40. I got 41. Still lost by 60-40. When I got 60% of the vote as a Republican and set a whole new standard, I mean, it shocked the political landscape. I was the only Republican in the Capitol when I became lieutenant governor. The first in 25 years to be elected, only the fourth in 150 years. Today, every single constitutional officer, all 7 of them, are all Republican. The entire congressional delegation is all Republican. There's majorities, supermajorities in both the House and Senate. I had 90% Democrat majorities when I was in office. It's changed that much. So if anybody wants to tell me about, well, boy, how will we ever get elected? We'll take our message right to the people is how we get elected. And I'm living proof we can get that done. But we can't if we pretend that they're never going to vote for us. Because I really believe that when we speak to the hearts of America, we can win those hearts. And we got to do that. Okay, somebody else. Yes, ma'am.
I'm getting back to the point about on TV and publicity. In Iowa, we get millions of phone calls about surveys.
Yeah.
A lot of times I just say, no, I'm not going to feed into the, does it actually help, or is it just the media trying to hype certain?
It's a good question. The question is about surveys because, yes, your phone never stops ringing in Iowa. And let's face it, between Christmas and February the 1st, you're going to hate the sound of your telephone. You're going to get a hernia going to your mailbox and bringing the mail back in from all the flyers and literature that you're going to get. And you're not going to be able to watch 10 minutes of basketball or football without having 6 minutes of political commercials. I get that. Part of what you're going to get in terms of phone survey is not necessarily a legitimate poll. It's what's called in the political business a push poll, where a candidate will pay a pollster to call and say, would you vote for Mike Huckabee if you heard that he stole cupcakes off little girls' plates at lunch when he was in junior high? Oh, no, I wouldn't do that. And a push poll is when very negative information is pushed upon you in the guise of conducting a poll. If you get those kind of calls, it's not a poll. It's actually an advocacy for a candidate, and it's I think one of the most underhanded things that happen in a campaign. That's why I don't believe polls are very reliable. Number one, a lot of people never answer their phones. Number two, people who do hang up as soon as they find out what it is. Number three, I'm convinced that because a lot of people don't even have a landline anymore, they only take a cell phone. Cell phones don't often get polled. There's just no really reliable poll. I mean, the race in Kentucky, Matt Bevin was supposed to lose that race, supposed to be razor close, and he was supposed to lose by 3 points. He won by 9. You can go time after time when the polls have been so dreadfully wrong. And they're worse now at predicting than they ever were because people just don't want to respond to someone's questions. And there's a certain kind of person that isn't going to take a lot of questions in a poll. Some people will. They got nothing else to do. People that are busy and have a life, they're not going to sit around on the phone for 30 minutes answering poll questions. If somebody calls you and says, "Who will you vote for?" and you say Mike Huckabee, that's great. You should do that. Any other questions? Say, I ain't got time for this. Hang on. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about being able to trust your candidate.
Yes, sir.
You know, it seems like all the candidates, they just spew whatever they want, whether it's true or not. First of all, I want to disclose something. I'm a Republican. I've always liked you since you came on the national scene, and I know you're intelligent. Now, you opened today talking about climate change. I want to know, why is it when there's lots of intelligent Republicans, lots of intelligent Democrats, why is climate change split right down the party line? Probably 95% of the people here are Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask them if they believe in man-made climate change, 9 out of 10 of them are going to tell you there's no such thing. If we were sitting with Democrats right now, 9 out of 10 would say there is such a thing. Why is it split right down? You know why? Because somebody's lying. Intelligent people here, intelligent people here. It can't just be a big coincidence that all Republicans believe one way.
Right.
Somebody's lying. So I want to know, when I'm talking to a candidate, an intelligent person, if that candidate can't be honest with me about that, how can I trust that candidate on any other issue?
You probably can't. Yeah.
No, it's wrong. Immigration isn't our problem. As much as I feel for the people that lost friends and relatives, 9/11, the Paris attack, as bad as Adolf Hitler was, we had Attila the Hun, we got through that. We had Adolf Hitler, we got through that. We're going to get through ISIS. We're going to get through a down economy. We got through the Great Depression. You mentioned you've got 5 grandchildren. They're going to have kids. They're going to have kids. One thing about this man in Washington now he's right about, our biggest problem is climate change. Our world, look, Greenland is disappearing. Miami Beach and Manhattan are eventually going to be underwater. These other things, as much as I detest all of them, the ISIS thing, they are not our problem. Climate change is, and if a candidate can't be honest with me about that, then I have trouble believing him when he says something else.
Well, I appreciate your candor. Now, let me just say to you that if there is climate change that can be scientifically documented, and science is not settled on this.
Yes, they are.
No, it's not. No, sir, it is not. Let me just take the issue with you. No, sir.
The scientists agree with it now.
That's not true. That is not true.
I'm a scientist.
With all due respect, that is not true. It is not that 95% of the scientists agree. Even the data is not reliable enough. I go back to the point that 40 years ago, the science was absolutely settled that we were into global cooling. That was settled science. If there is climate change, I believe there probably is climate change. I recognize the world is always adapting and changing. Well, but here's the thing. Some of the climate change happened when there was no CO2. There were no fossil fuels being spewed into the air. And we actually are spewing less in many ways because we have cleaner forms of energy. Most of the fossil fuels, the CO2, is often being put into the atmosphere by countries other than the United States, and they're not going to comply and wreck their economies and end their jobs.
The conference is about.
But here's something I can guarantee you we know something. Let me finish. I let you finish, so let me. There may be climate change. I think, and I will concede, I think there probably is. I think sometimes it gets cooler, sometimes it gets warmer. I believe God created the heavens and the earth. And if God created it, He created it to be adaptable. What I don't understand is the scientists who believe that the world is in an ever-changing state of evolution and adaptation somehow believe that if we don't step in and fix it, that somehow it's all going to blow up on us. So science is supposedly settled, and yet it isn't. And some of the truly most knowledgeable climatologists in the world absolutely say this is a political issue. It is not a scientific issue. But when I challenge liberals, one of the things I say, look, let's say the science isn't quite settled on climate change, but here's something the science is settled on, and tell me why the Democrats won't acknowledge it. The science is settled on when human life begins. It begins at conception when 23 chromosomes from a male and 23 from a female come together and create an entirely different human being that has a DNA schedule that is different from either the mother or the father. Therefore, it's a lie to say that it's a part of the woman's body, because it can't be. It is not like her liver or her kidney, because her liver and her kidney will have exactly the DNA schedule that the rest of her body does. This child inside of her does not. My point is, if we know that life begins at conception and that life is human, and if that life lives to be 90 years old, the DNA will look exactly the same at 90 as it did 9 minutes after conception. The science is settled on that. Why is it that Democrats continually advocate for the destruction of that human life at any time during the pregnancy? Why is it that they won't accept the settled science on when life begins? Because it's the political nature of the question, not the scientific nature of the question. Would you acknowledge that life begins at conception? Okay, science is settled. So why do the Democrats not accept that? Why do they advocate for abortion right up until the moment the baby comes out of the womb, even partial birth abortion? Because it's not for them a scientific issue. If it was, they would join us in their revulsion at what happens in Planned Parenthood clinics when baby parts are harvested and sold at an auction. The reason they don't is because for them it is a political issue. And I believe that for them climate change is not a scientific issue. It is a political issue, because if government can control us, if government can dictate to us our economic decisions, our decisions of freedom, then we will all be under the tyranny of a government that we cannot afford and cannot live with and still be free. Now, if that causes you to say, Huckabee, I can't vote for you, I get it. Not everybody's going to. But I'm not going to be ever able to tell you that climate change is the #1 issue we face, because even if there is, the scientists who believe in it think it's going to take perhaps hundreds of years before the full effect is realized. And I'm more worried about the next 30 days when somebody with a suicide vest comes and blows up the school where my grandkids go.
You've got an audience here that is fairly elderly. They're up in age. When we reach a certain point in our life when we don't matter near as much as our kids.
That's right. I'm there.
And stuff. And I'm telling you, this is, as much as I detest the man, his wanting to redistribute wealth and everything, I don't agree with him on anything else. He's right. This is the biggest crisis that we're facing.
Well, you know what? I respect your opinion, and I'm glad you expressed it. That's what's wonderful about America. You can come to a forum like this and tell me that you think that climate change is the greatest single danger we face. I respectfully, wholeheartedly disagree with you. And again, Thank God we live in America. We can both walk out of here and neither one of us will be arrested for having disagreed 100% on what we think the biggest issue in America is. All right, yes, sir, back there in the back, and then I'll take yours.
All of these opinions are opinions, but there are three great changes in this time. There's a lot more than three. There's some three that are really bad. And that's our president and ISIS, but I would call it the Middle East is the problem, not ISIS. What happens if you get rid of ISIS? It's a powder keg. And our Iran agreement is something that's unbelievable. But climate change, I believe, but even if there's a non-believer, why don't we clean up our world? What we don't, it's going to get us in the end, because it's getting worse all the time. If you look at the videos coming out of China with poor people walking around, kids in masks, you can't even see through the atmosphere. Well, you need to clean that up, and hopefully the conference would have something to amend that. But why do we argue about whether climate change is it's gotta be, if it's not, and I believe it is. But we need to do something about cleaning. What's the harm in cleaning up our act?
Well, no harm in cleaning it up. I'm a conservationist, but I'm not an environmentalist. Let me explain the difference. As a conservationist, I believe in practicing what I used to be taught as the Boy Scout rule of the campsite. Leave your campsite in as good or better shape than you found it. It's Boy Scout law. I think we should leave the environment in as good or better shape than we found it. We should enjoy the fruits of the environment, the resources of the environment. God gave us all the resources for us to use, utilize, and to prosper by. He did not give us the resources to plunder, to destroy, or to pollute. But look what we have done. This is where I get so frustrated, because I look back, I remember in the 60s when our major cities were spewing incredible toxins into the air and into the water. Remember when Cleveland, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire, and the river was on fire? Today you go to Cleveland, it's a clean city. Remember when Pittsburgh was the armpit of the Northeast because of just the stuff that was spewing? Pittsburgh is a beautiful city today. Why? Because we cleaned it up. We've done a lot of things to clean up our streams, our rivers, the air in this country, the cleanest it's ever been. We've been much better stewards. So for someone to go to Paris and to tell us that we're horrible people because we haven't done enough for the environment, I think we ought to be touting what we have done rather than flagellating ourselves for not having done enough. But I don't want to get to the place where we allow the government to manipulate us, kill our jobs, kill our economic development, put our families into poverty because we're afraid to drive a car halfway across the county, while the people who are telling us to live with these new rules of climate change fly private jets from one end of the world to the other, and they want us to ride bicycles. This, for me, is utter nonsense. So, look, I'm not going to solve this problem, but know this, that I believe that the single greatest threat we face immediately, which is an existential threat, is radical jihadism, because unlike the battles we had against Hitler, unlike the battles against the Japanese, what they wanted was conquest of territory, real estate, world domination. But what ISIS, and not just ISIS, but all the forms of radical jihad want, they want to kill every last one. They don't want to subjugate us. They want to kill us. They want to destroy Western civilization. They want to take us back to the 7th century, to a culture in which women are not treated as equal human beings. Women will never get an education. They would never be able to come to a meeting like this. And I don't think any of us really believe that that's a culture we want to embrace or tolerate, and we shouldn't. So it's the heart of what goes to wanting to destroy our very form of civilization and change us into a savage people. And I say savage intentionally because when you put someone in a cage, pour gasoline on them, burn them in a cage, and videotape it because you are proud of what you're doing, that's savage behavior. That is uncivilized behavior. When you cut people's heads off, and rather than try to hide what you're doing, you proudly put it on the internet where the world can see it and you hope everybody sees it. At least the Nazis, as evil as they were, tried to hide their atrocities. My God, what we've got with the radical jihadists is they're proud of their atrocities. They only want to make sure that there's more of them. I'm going to move on to your question, sir.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say that in some of my research, all of the world's astrologers have documented that the temperature of our surrounding planets has risen the same amount of degrees as that temperature of the Earth. None of them have cars.
Not that we know of.
You can look it up on the internet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, sir. I'm going to take yours, and then one other question. I'm going to let you guys go because it's cold outside.
I went and listened to Jeb talk last night, and he told us that the solution to ISIS is funding the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, and establishing a no-fly zone over northern Syria on the Turkish border. And I don't know if